Welcome to Crawlspace. I'm Tim here today with Lance in the Crawlspace studios in Wormtown. Lance, how goes it?
It's going pretty well. Bit windy outside. Took me a little longer to get here, but I did see the worm, and it was out in full force, regulating the wind.
I thought the wind was just the hot air coming out of your mouth, Lance, but you are right. It is windy out there. James McMahon is our guest, and he is a real interesting guy. He used to write for music magazines, and he's turned his gaze toward true crime.
Right. He primarily writes about true crime for The Independent, The Observer, Vice. He's got his mailing list called Spook, SPOOOK.
Yes, and you can find that on tinyletter.com/spook with 3 O's. And he's written about Andrew Gosden, a 14-year-old boy who disappeared. It's a really interesting case, and we actually spend the entire second half of this conversation with James talking about that case and that disappearance.
Andrew Gosden is probably what Brianna Maitland or Maura Murray is to us, to him. He's been following this for a long time. It happened 12 years ago. Andrew was 14 years old, and he leaves, and there's a strong indication that he left to go see a concert. He was a big fan of metal, and there was an indication that he was going to see a tour that was going through the UK, and he never came back, and it's very frustrating, and you hear it in our voices, especially his. He lives in Britain. It has even back 12 years ago, it had the most sophisticated surveillance system probably in the world, of any city in the world, yet they can't figure out point A to point B, where Andrew went missing.
And so the first half of the interview, we kind of run the true crime gamut, and we talk about the Lost Prophets and their lead singer, Ian Watkins, who actually James met once.
And said that Ian was the only person that he's walked away from basically with this feeling of dread, that he just exudes a sinister quality about him, and he really was. When he was apprehended for sexual assault, the list of charges against him, we're talking children under 13, like over and over and over. This guy was a serial sexual offender and left James with a horrible, horrible feeling.
So it's a really interesting conversation. We talk a bit even about his depression and his sort of transition from a music journalist to a true crime journalist, and he mentions having listened to Missing Maura Murray, so that's always really cool to hear someone talk about Missing Maura Murray like that.
And occasionally you get a compliment, and you're always trying to be humble about it when you get a compliment, but when someone like James compliments you and says that if we were to compare this in the music industry, we would be the Pixies and he would be Nirvana, and I that left me speechless.
So yeah, I hope you enjoy this interview. It's a really one of my favorite conversations, one of our favorite interviews I think we've ever done, and you can tell by the runtime. And so I hope you enjoy it, and let us know. We also have a brand new Crawlspace discussion group on Facebook, so check that out. There's a link in the show notes.
And also, we will have James back for future episodes. We wanted to touch on things like the pusher, the guy who is suspected of pushing people into the rivers in London, and we never even got to it just because the conversation with him was so good. He was also a little bit sick, so towards the end he really pushed it and powered through his sickness, but we really had to wrap it up with him because he was fading. Also, if anyone's considering going to CrimeCon in New Orleans in 2019, that's June 7th through the 9th, it's such a great time. You will experience your favorite podcasters, including us, True Crime Garage, Generation Y. Jordan from the Nighttime probably won't be there again, but that's a reoccurring joke. There's also seminars and informational type sessions
and
that you can learn.
Podcasts, Lance.
Live podcasts. You can come up to our booth and you can be a guest for a few minutes, and then we'll release that later. If you're considering going, definitely take the plunge on this one. New Orleans, great city, and you can use promo code Crawlspace19 to get 10% off your standard package ticket.
Crawlspace 19 at crimecon.com when you register today. And we're going to be doing some live podcasts down there, including a live Crawlspace and a live Missing Maura Murray.
And we might just do a live Empty Frames.
It's very possible and likely, I would say. Also, check out the full Crawlspace archive at StitcherPremium.com and use promo code MMM for a free month. Welcome to Crawlspace. We are here today being joined via the Skype hotline from across the pond by James McMahon. How are you?
Hello. I never tire of hearing how Americans pronounce the surname McMahon.
McMahon?
Whenever I visit the States, there's always a kind of, how are they going to say it? And they normally say it like the wrestling guy. So, but like McMahon. I mean, I would say McMahon, but I'm happy with either.
McMahon.
Yeah. James McMahon.
Oh, I like that. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, you don't have to sound like a leprechaun when you say it.
I am mostly Irish.
Oh, okay. Well, we're all family then. We're all family.
And when we say across the pond, we are not speaking about the Wormtown pond, which is just down the street. Your accent suggests that perhaps you are located somewhere across the ocean pond, the Atlantic.
Yes, I am English.
Okay.
The ocean pond, right.
Yeah, no. I'm from South Yorkshire, which is in the north of England, but I live in London these days.
Very cool.
Yorkshire's a lovely place.
It is. I mean, the bits they show you on telly are nice.
I worked at a British pub once, and we had a lot of Yorkshire-inspired type alcohol and food. So I grew accustomed to some bangers and mashed in the day.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's good. I mean, as a vegetarian, I'm not quite sure about the bangers bit, but I can eat mash all day. I can eat mash for England.
So can't Tim.
I do love me some potatoes. It's the Irish in me.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
So we came across some of your work on Vice, and you've been writing about true crime for a while now. And I think the first article we noticed that you had written was about the Pusher, but that is just a small slice of what you write about.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite a big deal for me to be speaking to you guys, to be honest. I'm sort of sat here and I'm hearing your voice come through the computer screen, both of your voices, and kind of thinking it's all come a bit full circle, really, because I wrote about music for years. I was staff at a magazine called Enemy, which is a big music magazine in the UK. And then I went to be editor of a magazine called Kerrang, which is a big rock magazine in the UK. And I did that for about 15 years. And I was always like hyper interested in like other things. Like I was always, super interested in like paranormal stuff or mysteries or cryptids was a big one. Like I've always had a massive interest in Bigfoot. And I guess that when I left my job at Kerrang, which was about 18 months ago now, two things happened. One of them is that I thought, now I can start writing about the things that really interest me. Yeah, I mean, there does come a point where like you can't find anything interesting to say about Papa Roach anymore. And I
find that highly unlikely.
Well, I mean, pretty much after the first interview, but I did my best. But so I thought, okay, well now I can really. Now I can write about the things I'm really interested in. The other thing that happened is I got unbelievably depressed. And during that time, I sat in my pajamas in my front room thinking, what on earth am I doing? And discovered the Maura Murray podcast. And just spent, like my wife would come home at the end of the day and be like, have they found her yet? It was... Seriously, James, you need to have a bath and do something other than listen to the Maura Murray podcast. But really, like from that, really kind of, I don't know, there's almost that thing with true crime and mysteries and podcasts where people almost feel like, they're interested in the subject matter, but they're interested in the community of it all, whether it's, theories on Reddit forums or the people who make the podcasts or, we all kind of like share in like little victories where we feel like our work has nudged the story forward. So, really like Maura Murray and then, kind of latter days your work with Crawlspace, like has been, really quite influential to me. and has inspired me to go, well, you know, a podcast isn't really what I want to do, but certainly with my writing, these are the stories that I want to tell. So
Wow.
That's where I've ended up where I am now.
Well, that's amazing. Yeah, thank you very much.
Basically, if I'm Nirvana, then you're the Pixies.
I just got the chills. I've never. This is like super humbling. Thank you so much.
No worries, no worries. I think what you guys do is amazing.
So it kind of sounds like you went through like a little bit of like a metamorphosis. Like you almost like cocooned yourself indoors, sort of changed your focus. You took in some true crime, and you came out of this cocoon a different writer.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, I think even when I think about it now, I think that, I mean, I was crazy on music, and music, was everything to me, and also, it was when I was like a 15-year-old kid growing up, the idea of being a music journalist was equivalent of being an astronaut. It was so beyond the realms of anything that I knew anyone had done. But the idea of being someone who wrote about true crime was even more so. So it was almost like I kind of had to do it to, kind of get to know the people I know now and the people who publish the stuff that I write now. But also, when I think about it, even my fandom within music was always a little bit wrapped up with the odd and the unexplained. I was a massive fan of the band the Manic Street Preachers, who are a Welsh band from the UK, who their rhythm guitarist went missing when I was a teenager, and the music press covered it, almost sort of in the UK has like a great tradition of weekly music magazines, and they covered it almost like sort of episodically, almost like a soap opera. And I remember being a teenager and just thinking, how sad it was that this guy who played, I mean, he was more of a lyricist than a guitarist, but how this guy kind of, who I loved his music, had gone missing, and I just presumed he'd come back. I just presumed that a month later that he'd turn up and say, hey, sorry for freaking you all out or whatever. And they've never found him, and they never found out what happened to him. I also think that I was an enormous Nirvana fan when I was a kid, and I was very quickly drawn into the Kurt Cobain murder conspiracies and things like that. So, despite being, it was always there, basically. It was just, kind of bubbling away and kind of waiting for me to have a bit more time to focus more on it as something that I did, in a larger part of my life.
That's incredible. This isn't so much of a question; it's just an observation. It is funny how you just said it was sort of there, bubbling away, and you had to go through this change, like Tim said, this metamorphosis. You did write for music, but you always had that element of mystery to it, and now you're writing about true crime and missing people and moments of crime that are unsolved, and you write about it really well.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks, man. I think, to be honest, I'm an enormous fan of, if I have a hero, kind of within this world, it's I'm like the biggest John Ronson fan.
Yeah.
We love John Ronson.
Man, that guy, I went to see him speak recently, and it was enormous for me. And, he always, people are so quick to, there's so many great bits of advice when it comes to journalism that that anyone who's done it for a period of time could impart on someone. But the one that I always come back to is something that he says about curiosity and always remaining curious. And I think that there's a real lesson for life there. Wherever you want to know things, wherever you're interested in things, I think that whether you are a writer or even just living a pretty regular life, there's a lot of satisfaction that can come from thinking like that. So yeah, big up John Ronson.
Yeah, totally agree.
The subject of curiosity is something that is really interesting to us because of what we do. You always have to remain curious. How do you make sure that moments in your professional career and in your professional life don't pass you by because you had you let your curiosity down for a moment? Does that make sense?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, I just don't. I'm not sure I really know what that would be like. Really, like I've always found that. People sometimes say to me, like, why do you write about the things that you write about? And it's just, I find this really interesting. I want to know more about it. I have found sometimes that, I used to just write and write and write. And I'm quite a creative person anyway. Like I draw and I do lots of other kind of arty things. And like, I've always, I kind of for a long time just filled my life with that. And I have, as I've got older, kind of learned that you have to stop sometimes and read things and watch things and go places and talk to people and actually allow yourself to soak some stuff up, because that's where the curiosity comes from. But I've just never really had, I don't know whether it's, how I was raised or whatever, but I've just never ever really been bored. I've never been bored. I just don't know what that really feels like.
Well, that's a good...
So there's always a load of things, that I want to. It's kind of weird actually. There's been I don't know whether, I presume they're an American company, but there's some books, some kids books by a company called Osborne. Like I think they make books for kids, and they. I was thinking about it about a year ago. Really, like this whole period of me starting to write about true crime and mystery, and also the kind of the mental health stuff that was going on at the beginning of all that, has really been a kind of quite a voyage of discovery for me. There's been a lot of like introspection and me working out who I am, what I want to do, all that kind of stuff. And during that time, I was thinking about these books that I was bought when I was a kid. And one of them was about ghosts, and one of them was about monsters, and one of them was about UFOs. And they were published by this company called Osborne, and the illustrations were amazing. And weirdly, around the same time, there's some other journalists I know who, one of them is a really great like history, writes a lot about history. A couple of other music journalists, a couple of like cartoonists I know, and they were sort of weirdly talking about these books as well. And I went on like Amazon, I think it was eBay, and I rebought them, and they were like lying on the kitchen table. And my wife got in and she was like flicking through them, and she was like, "This explains so much." These, there's like a ginormous double-page spread about like Bigfoot. There's like an enormous thing in there about the Loch Ness monster. My wife is unbelievably indulgent. Like we went to Loch Ness the other year, basically just to mess around and look for a nautical lizard that I'm pretty sure doesn't even exist anyway. Like she's always been fantastic at like indulging this stuff.
It's very romantic, actually.
Oh, my wife's fantastic. Big up John Ronson and big up my wife. They're the people I want to give props to.
Nice.
Well, would you mind talking a little bit about depression? Because I think that is something that everyone can relate to, and I know you've gone through some, and you'll occasionally tweet about your depression struggles. If there's anything you want to say about that, that'd be great.
Yeah, to be honest, it's not so much depression really as anxiety. Like I've always had a real, I guess you would call it OCD. Like not really in terms of I need things to line up and I need things to be tidy, but I've always had like a brain that throws some obsessional, intrusive thoughts in there. Didn't understand what it was for a long time. I'm 38. I'm not sure I had any idea what it was, other than it was very painful, and probably until I was about 30. Kind of had a lot of therapy in my 30s. I think in lots of ways, I don't say this in like a miserable way, because I think you get to a point in your life where you realize that, everyone's upbringing is to a degree a car crash.
But I think it has to be.
There were, but there were things growing up that definitely, I can go, okay, that's why I ended up thinking like that. But which again, I actually think ties into, a lot of what interests me and a lot of kind of what I write about. Like I actually wrote a piece the other week for a UK magazine called The Spectator about kind of why I wrote about true crime. And, I think a lot of it is almost an attempt to sort of understand families and relationships between people, almost like a sort of sociological kind of perspective on it, because that's a lot of stuff I've struggled with growing up. Anyway, that's slightly off topic. I don't know. I guess with my kind of anxiety, OCD, whatever. I mean, there was a period probably like 6 months ago, maybe more than that now. I'm doing okay at the moment, but there was a period where it was just. I mean, it was the worst it's ever been. Like I just was shouting it into the ether, just hoping someone would help me. But for a long time before that, I guess that there was so much like shame when I was like a younger man for thinking like that. You know, people talk about like breaking stigmas, and it's amazing that has happened, and it's amazing that 3 men, we can talk about toxic masculinity and things like that. That 3 men can be sat on other sides of the world talking about like mental health on a podcast. I mean that didn't exist when I was 20 and first thinking about these things. I guess I just reached a bit of a point where better out than in, really. Like I kind of felt a little bit like I'd sort of reached a bit of a stage in my profession where I'd achieved a fair bit. I was pretty proud of that I'd come from like kind of a background that maybe didn't suggest that would ever happen. I'd done that via kind of talent and hard work, and just felt a bit like I would hate any kids to feel like I did when I was 20, just going, what on earth is going on with my brain? Does this mean I can't have a interest in life? Is this going to be something that is going to dominate my entire existence? I mean, it has dominated my entire existence, but it also you can still like create a satisfying, rewarding life. I think that's what I'm trying to say.
You also said that you are a very creative person, and you, in addition to writing, you paint and you do artwork. Do you think that those two things go hand in hand, the anxiety and the OCD, or the need to tie things together, along with the fact that you said you projected outward instead of keeping it in? Do you think that has anything to do with you having a more creative mind?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's that thing sometimes where, sometimes I think that, I mean, bearing in mind, I believe that everyone is creative. I just feel like, I feel like life. I mean, I don't want to go all InfoWars on you here, but I feel a little bit like life is kind of designed to basically like stop people being a lot of things that they intuitively are. Like I think that everyone is creative. I just think that life doesn't allow it, or makes it quite difficult for a lot of people. Yeah. I don't think that's crazy to say that. I was just a little bit worried that I was going to sound a bit Alex Jones there.
No. That's not crazy at all.
Ask me about the shape-shifting lizards. But like,
okay, we'll segue.
Yeah, I think that I don't know. Like, I think it's that thing that sometimes I know other creative people. Like, I don't know anyone who's like really creative who doesn't struggle with stuff. But then again, I also have friends that are car mechanics and they struggle with stuff.
Yes.
And
yes.
I think that sometimes, people who are super creative go, okay, well, this is a bit of a trade-off. I don't know really. Like, I mean, there's been times where things have been so desperate for me where I've thought, oh, okay, well, if this means, if I'm really creative because I've got this stuff, I would not be creative in a heartbeat because I don't want to feel this bad. But we are who we are, aren't we? We're just going to learn to live in our own skin and get the most out of life that we can.
Yeah, and I agree with what you said. I don't know anyone who's really creative and doesn't deal with some struggles at times. And I just think people who are creative have a tough time dealing with the world. I mean, the world is a pretty fucked up place, and maybe people who work in creative fields, like they're more empathetic in some ways, so they feel it a little bit more.
I think also they open themselves up to a lot more of the other side that people don't typically see. In order to draw out that creative energy.
I mean, the empathy stuff is. I mean, I think that's really interesting because I've really confused views on things like whether evil exists. You know, like whether redemption is something that can exist, whether like rehabilitation is something that can happen. Like, and sometimes when I've been writing about true crime, I've almost got to a bit of a stage where, you know, I've always been like very, very passionately like anti the death penalty, for example, and which obviously isn't something particularly, you know, that we have to worry about in the UK. But you know, I remember watching a death row documentary when I was younger and just being like just appalled, and it's something I've been interested in all my life. Like, done work with Amnesty, and you know, just can't believe it's something that exists in a civilized world. But when I've been writing about particular crimes, like sometimes it's really challenged that, because I've just thought, I mean, this is evil, you know, like what people are capable of, the worst things. But therefore, you know, then it starts getting a bit, you know, you start thinking, well, actually, you know, it's more of a philosophical question, and you know, you have to take the emotion out of it. But what I'm really saying is that it's actually quite difficult doing this stuff when you really when you let it get under your skin, because you know, it's almost, there's a reason why when, you know, you watch True Detective, that, you know, it's an enthralling watch, because they're complicated people who are trying to make sense of this depravity that they're having to investigate. You know, like that's the story, that's the drama. It would be so much easier if you could just see it as procedural, you know, because you wouldn't have to see the faces of people, you wouldn't have to see the impact on families. And in a weird way, that's the stuff that really interests me about doing this, you know, like, you know, I haven't interviewed a murderer, you know, I've interviewed a lot of families of people who, you know, have got family who've probably been murdered. So, anyway, it's very deep, this, isn't it?
Yeah.
We love it.
What time is it there? It's like 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock or something. It's like, I feel like it's 7 o'clock here and it's dark. I feel like I can get away with being deep. Well, maybe you guys need to cheer up.
Well, we surround ourselves in this black box that we call the Crawlspace Studios, and it's inside of a old textile mill, and we do not see the light of day. So for all we know, Wormtown could be burning right now. We could just be sitting in here with our dark thoughts.
I feel like my next project is going to be researching Wormtown. I can't even believe that that's a real place.
Well, when you start researching, the first place you go to is the renovated textile mill that Crawlspace operates out of, and we will give you the broad strokes, and then you're at your own devices to go and seek out the worm. I'm just telling you, it might end badly for both of you.
I mean, surely Wormtown surely it's just a location pulled from like a James Renner novel or something. Like,
well, it's Worcester. Yeah, it's Worcester, Massachusetts. It's affectionately called Wormtown, and we kind of brought that nickname back, or we're trying to. I don't know. It's kind of hung around Wormtown or Worcester since the 70s, but
it's raining today, so you know the worm's out.
Yeah, keep going. I like it.
There is a giant worm that lives in the sewers that comes out during the floods. That's what we've heard.
Oh, I mean, we're back to cryptids, aren't we?
Yeah. And there's literally one that just squirms its way underneath our feet on a daily basis.
Yeah, you can feel it sometimes. It kind of feels like a low Richter scale earthquake.
Like a tremor.
Yeah.
A bit of a tremor. Not to be confused with the classic
Kevin Bacon movie. Yeah.
Fred
Tremors.
Ward movie. Reba McEntire. You want the rest of the cast?
Please.
You, sir, brought up an interesting point that I struggle with sometimes, and I might just be splitting hairs on this. I kind of get bothered when people describe horrendous individuals like Ted Bundy or the Golden State Killer as pure evil, because I feel like saying pure evil is equating them to something that is fictional, like Hannibal Lecter or the devil, and that is, maybe this is not the right word, I feel like that is somehow pandering to people, and they don't really grasp the severity of some of these criminals' crimes.
Yeah, I feel like often the word evil is a little bit of an out in a way.
Yeah.
Because I almost feel like evil is like it feels like a supernatural term. You know, whether you believe in the supernatural or not, I mean, that's a different conversation. But for me, it just doesn't do any of the hard work in trying to work out how this stuff has happened. I'm writing a piece at the moment. I'm going to say her name wrong, but Joanna Barraza, who is a woman from Mexico City who was known as the Old Lady Killer. I'm writing it for a website called Mel. And she is kind of interesting because, she was by day or by night, she was it was by night and it was by day when she did her crimes, but she was a Mexican wrestler who basically killed old women during the day.
What?
And
wow.
Yeah, it's a crazy and tragic story, but it's what she did was evil, inverted commas, and certainly if my grandmother was one of the victims, I'd find it very hard to use any word other than evil. But when you start digging in and you start kind of reading about her early days and about how she was sold to a man who was 40 years a senior as basically a sex slave when she was 12. Her mum traded her for 3 bottles of beer. Her alcoholic mum traded her for 3 bottles of beer. How she basically had spent her entire childhood and teenage years being raped repeatedly, getting pregnant and then miscarrying, getting pregnant, miscarrying. She has a son. Her son dies, in a gangland, standoff. And there's all this tragedy in there. And then you start going, okay, well, what she did was horrendous and deplorable, and she's one of the worst criminals in Mexico's history. But there is definitely a starting point for how she got there. And I feel like if you use the word evil, we don't learn anything about how these things happen. And then because of that, the cycle never ends.
Yeah.
And I think ultimately what we do, and when I say we, I start with idiots like me writing about this stuff, or you guys talking about it on a podcast, and end with people within the criminal justice system, is ultimately we have to be trying to make the world a better, happier, safer place. This can't just be about condemnation. This has to be about trying to make things better, surely. Maybe I'm naive. They say I'm a dreamer. I'm not the only one.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah, I think the word evil, describing people as evil, is kind of a little lazy. Perhaps it's almost like a word like a prosecutor will use for impact, just to see what make an impression on the jury. But it's not really fair to call her evil, because it seems like most of these killers that we look into and that I've heard about, it's a total mixture of nature versus nurture.
Yeah, totally. And I don't really have the answers. That's not really. My interest in it is kind of very kind of cod psychological, I guess. But there's a writer called Gordon Byrne who he's my favorite writer. He's sadly passed away now, but he was he wrote a lot about crime. He also wrote about things like football, but he wrote about crime. He was from the northeast of England, and he wrote 2 crime books that I would recommend to anyone who's really interested in this stuff. One of them is called Happy Like Murderers, which is about Fred and Rose West. Which is the most depraved crime story that I can think of. I just cannot even understand how anything could plunge more into the inverted commas evil that he was capable of than what they did.
That was the couple that would abduct the young women, right? And then they found all the bodies in the backyard.
I mean, including some members of their own family as well.
Yeah, the daughter, right?
Yeah, some of their own children. I mean, again, a lot of this stuff was, going back to how I, kind of got an interest in this stuff. These were stories that broke when I was at school. I remember, pre-internet, pre-mobile phones, that story breaking, as in they found a load of people under the concrete in this house in Gloucester. That was something that a teacher would come in and everyone in the class would just stop and talk about it for a while, But anyway, he wrote this book, Happy Like Murderers, and he also wrote this book called, I'm going to get this wrong, but I believe it's called Somebody's Husband, Somebody's Son, which is about the Yorkshire Ripper, Peter Sutcliffe, which happened like just before I was born, but kind of down the road in like Leeds and Bradford. I grew up in Doncaster, and this place is probably like 40 miles away. You know, it's definitely like, you know, when he was like killing women, you know, it would have been an era where my mum, for example, like would have been scared, like walking on her own in the town I grew up in. And he's fantastic at that, at just trying to not just report the depravity on it, but just try to work out like how these people ended up where they ended up. And sometimes he struggles in his writing. Like you can see, whilst it's not explicit and he's not saying it, sometimes you can tell that he's struggling and he just wants an out. He just wants to go, well, they're evil, because it's almost like too hard to like live with. It's too hard to sit with it. But again, you know, and I hate being that guy, because nobody wants to be a cheerleader for Fred and Rose West, you know, because what they did was so appalling. But when you start reading about what their parents did to them, it's hard not to think that there's some lessons there that if we maybe spent a little bit more time there rather than at the judgment end, maybe we'd understand people better. Maybe we'd stop some of this stuff.
I think that the educational part of it is what you're saying, that even though it's really tough to sort of delve the depths of this darkness, you need to do it, and it's not going to be easy, but in the long run, it will be for the greater good if you understand someone like Fred and Rosemary West. If you understand what they did, why they did it, where it comes from, you can go a long way in preventing that and identifying that in future spree killers, serial killers, even domestic abusers.
Totally. I just think that whole thing of like, you know, there being a cycle is just, you know, history's just proved that over and over and over again. Weirdly, you know, like obviously Ted Bundy is like, you know, so prominent in the news right now. Ted Bundy's the one that I can never work out. I can never work out where that starts. Like I find him the most banal serial killer, because I just think he was so, I mean, he just blatantly hated women. You know, he just blatantly like hated women. I can't work out where that comes from. And again, you know, like I'm not a psychologist, you know, but like often you can go, oh, I think that's, you know, Fred West, for example, like, you know, his father really instilled in him an unbelievable warped view of the world that he almost didn't have a chance in escaping because he had no one telling him otherwise. Ted Bundy, just think that guy, man. Breaking news: Ted Bundy, what a rotter.
Well, yeah, I think it's interesting because Fred and Rose West, they didn't have the exact same upbringing, obviously. So
not even close,
right?
Yeah.
So that's not possible. So Ted Bundy's upbringing was obviously a little different from them as well. So you can't throw them all into the same bucket. Bundy was a solo guy. These two acted together. I think something about a combination of people will sometimes make that energy combustible, and you may get like that. But I think that's in a totally different category than Bundy, and then someone else who you can really identify as nature or nurture.
Yeah. Do you want to hear my theory on Ted Bundy?
Please.
I kind of gave it a few episodes ago, or I developed it a few episodes ago when we talked to Mike Morford, good friend of the show. There have been accounts of Ted Bundy, people in his presence, when he's when he goes through this change that he experiences, when he's getting into this rage and he's about to kill, or he's talking about killing, who have seen his eyes change color. They say his eyes would go to like a darker color. They would look darker, maybe black. That could just be that could be them thinking that they're seeing it, but he would start to sweat and he would exude this odor. Like one woman called it a coppery odor, like as if you could smell blood,
Metallic,
a metallic odor. And I was just trying to wrap my head around the concept of maybe there's something in his brain, something that's firing wrong, something that is producing this thing that's causing a voice, telling him in this rage monster voice that he has to smash someone's head open, that this is like a release of this enzyme or something, some sort of release that gets into his blood, gets into his sweat, and you can literally smell it. So it's almost like a psychogene.
We heard that with the Golden State Killer as well, about an odor that he emitted. Now some people thought maybe that was like I think it was like a Crisco that he would spray on himself before he would,
so he could slip through things.
But yeah, I don't know that it answers all the questions. So I think that thought is extremely interesting.
I try not to talk about this very often, so this is bear with me while I kind of venture into the recesses of my mind. But when I was working in my last job, the rock magazine, have you heard of a guy called Ian Watkins?
Doesn't sound familiar.
So Ian Watkins was a singer in a rock band who were pretty big. Well, I mean, they were really big in Britain, called Lost Prophets, all one word. I think they had like a little, they'd sort of made a bit of an indent into the States, but there's, such a difference between what is, a big deal in the UK and what is a big deal in the States. But they were sort of, somewhere between that, like kind of new metal kind of and emo. They to a generation of rock fans in the UK, they were probably your favourite band. And they were from Wales. I never particularly got on with him. I remember he blocked me on Twitter once. I was, to be honest, with hindsight, maybe too combative with various rock stars in my position as the editor of a rock magazine. But he came into our offices. He was coming in to do some press, but the idea was that we were going to have a coffee and we were going to basically try and kind of iron things out for the good of them being covered in the magazine and for us having access to them and the like. And I remember he turned up and he was about 4 hours late. And he turned up and I remember I shook his hand and again, like I want to be careful that this doesn't sound too spooky and too supernatural, but I was chilled. Like it was like meeting, the only way I can describe it is like meeting a ghost. And then a week later, he got arrested on suspicion of child abuse. And at the time, people thought that maybe he had inappropriate relations with a fan who was like below age. But basically, kind of years later, and when it went to court, like it transpired that he had been grooming teenage fans of his band, and he had attempted to rape their children. And this was all in the court notes. And basically, he's in prison now. I believe he's doing almost 40 years. And like enormous scandal, like within British rock music. Like, I mean, this guy's like, I mean, not that you can rank this stuff in terms of who's the worst, but this is like, for me, this is like, I mean, it's above R. Kelly, right? It's above, It's above Michael Jackson. But it was like so crazy because this was someone who all of my peers knew, like they'd almost grown up with, because they were such a prominent band within British rock music. But when I met him, and I obviously didn't know any of what he'd done, when I met him, it was such a strange experience. Like, it was like, oh, I've just met Dracula. Like, I've just met like the Prince of Darkness. And when I look back on it, and I just go, maybe there's something unquantifiable there, because afterwards I just was so freaked out by what had just happened that I'd met this guy and felt like I'd met someone with no soul,
My God. And you didn't know anything about his behavior outside of the music industry, right?
No. I mean, I've definitely met musicians before and kind of heard rumors that, they maybe haven't checked, the ID of, girls that have ended up backstage, and thought very badly about them. But this was, what he did was, I mean, nobody could ever predict that this guy, what he'd done, been so wrong. I mean, it's stomach-turning stuff, but, the court documents are all online. I mean, I really, I'm not 100% sure, when trigger warnings are appropriate, but they certainly are in this case. like I can't stress that enough, because what transpires he did was so appalling.
He's pure evil.
I didn't know any of that. But again, we're back to Saint Evil, aren't we?
No, I'm just kidding. That's really compelling. I wonder if that is your empathy, on I don't know, like your radar was just up. Like maybe you have more empathy than most people, and you picked up on something that most people don't.
I don't know.
I think
it was weird. It was weird.
I think, like when a dog will growl at somebody and the owner's like, "Oh, my dog never growls at people," and then you find out that the person's a serial killer or something. Not like that happens to me every day, but you hear dogs do identify characteristics that aren't overtly present to humans. Perhaps there's a bit of, this is a compliment, a bit of canine in you.
that would explain why I'm so hairy in various places.
Let's get into a little bit of your writing and some of your articles. And we were looking at your article on the disappearance of Andrew Gosden.
Yeah.
And that's a really tragic story. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think with Andrew, it is I found myself drawn to it because it just feels really close to home. Andrew is from Doncaster in South Yorkshire, which is where I'm from. He went to Macaulay High School, which is a Catholic secondary school in Doncaster, which my younger brother went to. They were quite far apart in terms of years, but they both went to the same school. He was a rock fan. Every picture of him that exists on the internet, he's wearing a band that I've interviewed or know a little bit or whatever. The rock magazine I used to write for, like his dad Tommy, he used to read. He was a specky, nerdy kid that liked video games. I definitely relate to that. One of my best friends lived in a street around the corner from where he grew up. Like it was just very, very close to home. And he went missing on the 14th of September in 2007. Just the strangest story in that when I was really consumed with the Maura Murray story, I couldn't believe that there were so many. I couldn't believe there was so many directions you could go in. And with Andrew, his story kind of has like a definite, as close as you can have to have a definitive end without having any answers, if that makes sense. There's just questions. There just isn't anything to go any further with, and that's infuriating. So he basically he was 14. He woke up one morning. His parents remember him being quite grumpy. Nothing too strange, the 14-year-old kid. But it wasn't kind of typical with his, how his personality regularly was. He got up, he got dressed, he left the house. It's believed that he went to a local park. He sat there for 20 minutes while he waited for his parents to leave and his sister to leave for the day. He went back home. He got changed out of his school uniform. He picked up his PSP, but like no charger for it. I mean, a lot of these things sound like you're clutching at straws, trying to make sense of things, But I think sometimes that's how leads are generated,
totally.
Aren't they? Like by looking at smaller things. But he walks to Doncaster train station. That's probably about a 20-minute walk from Balby, which is a suburb of Doncaster that he lived. He draws out £200. He empties his bank account. He's got £200 in there. Weirdly, leaves £100 in birthday money in his room. But he draws the £200 out. Gets to the train station. He asks for a single to London, which is about a 2.5-hour journey from Doncaster on the train. The lady behind the counter is a little bit alarmed that he looks so young. You know, he was 14, but he looked a lot younger. She says, "Oh, would you like to get a return? It's only 50 pence more." He says, "No, I'm okay." And he gets the single, gets on the train. People on the train remember him sitting there playing his PSP, you know, not being any fuss or whatever. Gets off the train at King's Cross, and no one ever sees him again. There was a breakdown of communication between South Yorkshire Police, who have an appalling reputation in the UK, being at the heart of like a whole host of scandals, whether it's the Hillsborough football stadium disaster, or there's been a grooming scandal in South Yorkshire recently. Yeah, they didn't communicate correctly with the Met Police, who is basically the people who, you know, who are the police in London. They didn't look at the CCTV footage by the time that they'd actually communicated properly to look at the CCTV footage at King's Cross Station in London. It had been wiped. So he really just walks into nowhere. It's crazy to me that, you know, even in, you know, 2007, you know, CCTV was everywhere. I mean, we were all talking about, you know, what that meant for like freedoms and civil liberties and all this sort of stuff. Like, you know, all of London is covered by CCTV, and yet we don't know where he went because no one bothered to check the tape.
Ugh.
What happens to the tapes?
Well, they just get wiped. They were digital, so they got wiped.
They get wiped after 24 hours or something?
I think they get wiped after, I believe, and this is going on memory, so you would have to check it, but I believe it's 6 weeks. That's how long it'd been. Yeah, that's how long it had been of, you know, the kind of the brain not talking, you know, the disconnect between the departments.
Yeah, I mean,
but also as well, I mean, what's said is that the investigation very quickly focused on the father, Kevin Gosden, which again, you know, is always going to be the person that you speak to, but very, very strange that they honed in there when this wasn't it wasn't a murder investigation. You know, it was a missing person. So, you know, like certainly the family believe that a lot of time was wasted because because basically the focus went on the family rather than, well, what's on the tape.
Yeah,
Wow.
That's totally understandable.
Wow.
And yeah, Lance, you're making it out like 6 weeks is bad. You know they have to store that on a hard drive, right? I mean that takes up space. It costs a little bit of money to buy an external hard drive. Yeah, no, I'm being sarcastic.
Yeah.
It pisses me off, to be honest, because part of what we do here is we try to work alongside law enforcement occasionally, and we'll even find ourselves defending their work occasionally because I think sometimes they get scrutinized
A little too unjustly.
I think so. Yeah, but in this case, what the fuck?
I mean, to be honest, I agree with what you're saying. I think that because of my route into this, I'm often maybe interested in the failings of media as much as maybe when the police get it wrong. There's a story I've written about quite a bit now, like a famous unsolved murder in the UK of a woman called Penny Bell, who was stabbed to death in 1991. She'd gone to meet someone who no one knows who she went to meet. She'd drawn out £8,500. No one knows what that money was for, and they never found out who did it. But when they found out that her husband had been in a relationship with a man before they were married, all of the focus became, oh well, it must have been the gay husband, right?
Right.
So I'm really interested in that stuff, almost like how the media can have a detrimental effect with their prejudice or their biases. I think a little bit like that kind of exists with the Andrew Gosden case, actually, where immediately people are like, well, it's got to be the family, isn't it? You know? But the police definitely in tandem, you know, drop the ball. And because of that, there's just a lot of scratching around. Like, the fact that he was a rock fan, for example, is something that's talked about a lot, because it was honed in on what the other, like what rock gigs were taking place that day in London. There was a band called Sixth, who like a sort of arty metal band in the UK. They were doing like their final show that day. 36 to Mars, like Jared Leto, the Actors band. Him, the Finnish goth band, they were doing an in-store a few days later. But really, it's clutching at straws. But it's because there's not really anything else to kind of grab onto.
Right.
There was a sighting on Oxford Street, which makes sense. That's kind of, if you were a 14-year-old kid and you were in London for the day, you would probably head there. It's where, certainly at that point, it's where all the, the kind of the touristy kind of, fun shops are. There's a Pizza Hut down there, which I believe is where, people said they'd seen him. But it really is kind of clutching at straws, but it's just so maddening. This isn't like, I don't know, it's London, it's one of the world's greatest cities. And yet this kid, and, really a kid, like I say, 14, but, could really pass for 8 or 9. Is wandering around and no one knows anything that happened to him. It's just maddening. I know sometimes, in the early days of the Maura Murray podcast, because when I started listening, I started from the beginning. In the early days, there's moments where the two of you are you just sound like at your wit's end in a sense, because it just doesn't make any sense to you. And I find when I think about Andrew, I have like a similar reaction, to be honest.
Did you know anything about his mental health? Did he have any sort of condition?
Well, I've sat down with his dad a few times now. I would like to speak to his sister. I haven't spoke to his sister. I feel a little bit like conflicted because I know that she had some real problems with her mental health because her little brother went missing and no one knows what happened to him. And in a way, I felt a little bit like she's trying to, live her life. She's trying to move on. But at the same time, I know that all of the family, he's talked about it himself, so I don't think it's kind of bad for me to say. But Andrew's dad, Kevin, I mean, he had a breakdown and like tried to end his life under the sort of gaze of like the police investigation upon him. So I would like to speak to his sister, and I've also thought that I would like to speak to some of his peers that were at the school that he went to. But from speaking to Kevin, they were quite a tight-knit family. He said that there was a change of mood, like in the months that like led up to his disappearance. At the same time, the night before he went missing, he was doing a jigsaw puzzle with his dad,
right,
and watching comedy shows with his mum. I mean, for me, like, I definitely hold out hope, but I just can't. I can't understand. It doesn't seem like a kid running away to me.
No, it really doesn't. Yeah, and you mentioned those two things, and those are kind of two straws that don't connect as well. He was also in the gifted and talented program at school, so this is a very, very bright kid.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely been like hung upon. He was a really smart kid. I mean, I don't know. I don't totally know how much that has to do with it, other than he was like, his dad had said that he was quite, almost kind of like bored. It was almost like what they were doing at school was quite simplistic to him because he was quite advanced. I can see that. I can. Without being big-headed, I can maybe even relate a little bit to that. But at the same time, he never had a flawless attendance record at school. It's the train ticket on the way back that I can't work out. I mean, there's loads of, there's loads of weird kind of happenstance in there as well. Like, when he didn't turn up for school that day, like the school, rang his parents to basically say he hadn't turned up for school that day, but they'd called the wrong number, so actually his parents didn't know about it until like that evening, whereas the school were trying to tell him that morning. Kind of he had like family in London, but none of those family had any idea that he was turning up in London that day. It wasn't like he got to London and walked to a payphone, and there's things that don't make sense to me either as well. I mean, Kevin said that he had a mobile phone but he didn't use it. That he didn't, he wasn't on the internet, which, I mean, he can say that as his dad. I'm not sure whether I totally believe it, because there was plenty of things that I was doing when I was 14 that my parents would probably say I wasn't doing, but I was. But then I also know that, the police took away the family computer, and they also took away the computers that were free to use in the local library. And nothing was found there. He had, like, one of the things that really works against him, Andrew, is that he went missing the same year as Madeleine McCann. Do you know about Madeleine McCann?
Yeah, we do. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Madeleine McCann is obviously like the most notorious, missing person story, other than maybe, oh God, I mean, she is, because I can't remember the name of the other guy, but it was the same. It was the same year. I believe she was May and Andrew was September. So I mean, any kid that went missing in 2007 that wasn't Madeleine McCann didn't stand a chance of being the focus. I mean, it's so weird. He's the face of the charity Missing People now. And his face, his like 14-year-old face, is on a bus stop just outside my house, because his face is all over the country now, because he is like the face of this campaign. It's the strangest thing to have written about him so much, and then be walking to the shop in the morning to get milk, and see him at some family gathering, however many, 11 years ago, kind of grinning at you. It's really weird. There was like a little kind of glimmer of hope. There was a lead, which is, I guess, hopeful in the sense that there doesn't ever seem to be anything new that comes about in this case, which is on the 10-year anniversary of his disappearance, there was someone who came forward saying they'd been speaking to someone on a website, on a forum. This person had been asking. They'd kind of struck up like a connection. This person had said that once they'd kind of been speaking long enough to actually kind of like share anything of any kind of depth, had basically kind of started talking about how he'd ran away from home when he was 14. He was asking if he could like lend some money. This person, once they'd finished talking, this person kind of thought, oh, that's kind of strange. Once they'd kind of seen the family doing the kind of the circuit of the media, he'd come forward and said, oh, this is kind of strange. The thing that sort of ties it in a bit is that this person was using the username Andy Rue, and Kevin, his dad, says that his nickname when he was a child was Rue. So that seemed a little bit strange, and that was in Lincoln, which is maybe 45 minutes away from Doncaster. So the family and the police kind of like honed in there kind of middle of last year, like new poster campaigns and things like that, like trying to see if there was anything in that. But at the same time, again, it just comes back to that kind of cult psychology. Like, why, if you want to be off the radar, why are you using your childhood nickname? I don't know,
So what happened with Andy Rue, the person who was behind this?
Basically, nothing came of it. There was a sighting in Lincoln of someone working in a shop that they went and investigated. The other thing that's really strange about him is that Andrew had quite a unique like ridge on his ear. It's in all of the kind of age enhanced photos. It's they've included the picture of his ear, but like Madeleine McCann had something with her pupil that basically she would have all her life. Like Andrew had that with his ridge, but at the same time as well, like if you kind of go down the rabbit hole of Reddit, reading about Andrew Gosden, there's many people who've suggested that maybe it was this person at this YouTube gathering, which was the day that he went missing in London. A lot of people who like rock music at that particular juncture in time looked a lot like Andrew Gosden. Like, he had like that kind of swept to one side, emo-y fringe. He wears glasses because he was a kid that liked computers and heavy metal. Like, he didn't really, there wasn't anything really that other than the ridge on his ear, which is like underneath his hair. There's nothing that really sets him apart. So even now, like on Reddit, there'll be, oh, maybe it's this person, or maybe it's this person. But when I speak to his dad's like, there's never been a time where he's seen a photo of someone and gone, yeah, that's my son.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. So they followed it up in Lincoln. I mean, I even just typing Andy Rue Lincoln into Google, like, I found someone in Lincoln called Andy Rue, who, it was the strangest thing, who had a Twitter account that was just pumping out like left-wing, pro-Democrat, anti-Trump, just retweeting anti-Trump stories, which like immediately made me think, oh, I quite like this guy, I'd like to be friends. But he yeah, I mean, he was called Andy Rue and he was from Lincoln, but it was just the strangest thing. It was almost like it had to be a bot or something, because why is someone in Lincoln, why is that what they do? Why, the strangest thing. But, having like spoken to the family, they don't think that there was anything in it now. They just think that, I mean, Rue, I don't know, that Rue, is it that unique a childhood nickname? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I was just going to ask that, if that's something that is typical as far as a nickname.
I guess it's a nickname for Andrew. You can go with Drew. You can go with Andy.
Rue. Yeah.
There's lots of places you can go with it.
Interesting. So you're still in communication with Kevin, Andy's father. Is there anything aside from law enforcement doing their job that he wants to have happen with this case? Is there to bring some sort of closure for him and his son and his family? Is there a public outreach that he's looking for?
He's quite a unique bloke, in the sense that it feels like the focus of his efforts these days is more about drumming up interest in missing people, the charity, rather than actually like kind of shaking any more information about what happened to his son. I think that maybe some of that is to do with the breakdown he had. And I think also he's quite religious, like the family are quite religious. So I think that there is an element of, I mean, he said, like, how can I ever give up on my son? Like, until there's, I mean, these are his words, not mine, but, until there's a bag of bones, how is this, is the story come to an end? But I think he's more about, the Andrew Gosden Twitter feed basically retweets stories about teenagers that go missing, kind of every day. Mm-hmm. It's not just information about Andrew. It's about, other missing teenagers. He does a lot of publicity about, if you're a teenager, you're thinking about leaving home, these are people you can speak to, it's confidential, they're not going to tell your parents, blah, blah, blah. So it's more about kind of the greater good, really, than about Andrew. I mean, I find that very admirable. I feel like when I first stumbled upon the Maura Murray podcast, the first thing I thought was, well, this has to exist for Andrew. This is what should exist for Andrew. The problem is that, I mean, what episode are you on now? Like 1,504 or whatever. Yeah. Like,
yeah.
I don't think you could get more than 10 episodes out of the Andrew Gosden story, because they're all just these strange. They're all just these odd things that happened.
Don't dare us.
Don't you dare throw that gauntlet our way.
Don't challenge us, James.
I have one thing about Andrew's case that I want to ask you. In November of 2008, there was a man who visited a police station out there, and what was the circumstances around that? Because that's a really interesting element of this whole thing.
Yeah, that's really it's creepy, isn't it?
Yeah.
That was, God, I'm gonna have to check where that was, but I believe it was Shrewsbury.
I think it's Leominster. It says. Or
Yeah, which is
Leominster.
which is like just outside like Shrewsbury.
Okay.
Yeah, no, someone turned up and went to the intercom. I'm trying to think. I mean, I don't have a tremendous amount of experience with police stations in the States, so I'm trying to sort of think how this would differ. But like out of hours, like a police station maybe wouldn't be like staffed, like it would be during like in hours.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you would go and like use an intercom because they would basically be locked up and there would be someone kind of there late at night. So someone goes to the intercom, says, "Oh, I've got some information about Andrew Gosden." Whoever it is says, "Okay, I'll kind of go get so and so. I'll be right there." By the time they get there, this person's left. What's quite strange about that is that when you put the police station into Google Maps, like this is like a police station which is on an industrial estate, like in the middle of nowhere. It's not like somewhere you'd just be passing in the street and think, "Oh, I'll pop in there." Like you've got to go there if you want to go there. I believe that there's a TV show called The One Show, which is like a popular kind of like newsy kind of light entertainment daily show. It's on the BBC in the UK, and when the Gosdens were on that show talking about Andrew, whoever it was, well, the person, someone called the show and said that they were the person who would come in with information about Andrew Gosden. It was never like released what it was they had to say, but I believe that he did make contact again. One of the things that is really strange about everything to do with Andrew as well is that I think for the largest part, like in terms of like investigating disappearances, like law enforcement do a decent job. Like I think there's like an awful lot like asked of them. I think especially like in the UK, there's been so many like cuts to like policing in recent times. I think it's a really difficult job. But whenever there is a story like Andrew Gosden, or there is an unsolved murder like Penny Bell, like I was talking about before, like it's always like mistakes have been made. Like it never really feels like, oh, it's just unlucky, or this is just how the cards have fallen. It's like in the early days of the investigation, mistakes were made. So in this case, it's like we didn't look at the CCTV. What it does feel like with the Gosdens is when I ask them, "Oh, what came of that?" or "What came of that?" like quite often they won't know. Like quite often, it feels like actually only in recent years that they have had anyone within the police who has been almost like a designated contact with them, who will keep them updated of where they're at. And obviously in recent years it's been a lot less than it would have been 10 years ago. So I don't know whether that's like the police are basically kind of like caught up and they're kind of doing what they should have always been doing, or whether it's that kind of family liaison wasn't something that the police were particularly equipped to do at that point. I don't know. And actually, to be honest, just talking about it now has made me think that it's something that we're going back to curiosity, back to something I would like to know a little bit more about how that's evolved. But quite often, I think there's something with the Gosdens now, when I was saying with Kevin, him talking about, kind of maybe be more interested in actually like how to avoid this happening to another family rather than actually what can we shake up about Andrew. He finds it quite hard, I think, to like tolerate the stuff that we find interesting about these stories. So, for example, like on the Maura Murray podcast, there are things, I don't know, like, like I love James Renner, right? I think he's a really interesting guy, but there's definitely things I don't agree with the way that he approached that story. And I think that would be like really hard work if you're Fred Murray, for example. Sure. And I found a little bit that when I've been like trying to dig into like Andrew's story, that there are things that like Kevin Gosden finds it hard not to roll his eyes and be irritated by, because he can't be asked again, like, do you think your son went to this rock concert a band that he doesn't know whether his son liked or didn't like, by someone thinking that they are going to break the case, like.
Yeah.
So it's strange, really, in the sense that I don't know. I've seen pictures of Kevin Gosden with his son, right? Before Andrew went missing, and the Kevin Gosden that you see now, I mean, there's just nothing in his eyes. I mean, obviously he's carried on because he's got a daughter. But I mean, I remember the first time I went to meet him, when I was writing about him for the first time, which I believe was for a magazine called Real Crime. I think I wrote that before I wrote the Vice piece, and I was. I got dropped off by someone outside his house, and it probably took about 10 minutes for him to come to the door. And when he came to the door, he was like groggy, and he basically, apologized because he'd been asleep. Like, he wasn't working anymore because he just couldn't work. Like, he's, like, mentally he couldn't work anymore. So he was like basically just helping out by like cleaning his local church. He was like, wearing like sweatpants, and I mean, this is like 10 years on or whatever, like.
Yeah.
So it's hard, because I'm interested in all the kind of the tidbits, like that's what brought me here, I want to understand this. But on the other hand, like, I think he finds it really hard, because, well, obviously he finds it really hard, but I think he finds the kind of the armchair detective stuff hard work. Like, for me, there needs to be a lot more of that, but I don't know whether having what he's been through, he's really built to be able to deal with that now.
I can't even imagine how exhausting it must be for somebody who's going through that to then have to go through it again vicariously through someone who wants to genuinely help, but you have to relive it over and over.
Have you heard of Charles Horrifallen?
Doesn't sound familiar.
So he's a guy who went missing, like when he was backpacking across British Columbia, like in the late 80s. He went missing when he was 20. Pretty sure he was murdered. Like, he's, everything suggests that he was murdered. Like, he was killed in like a fight. But his mum, I've spoken to his mum because I've written about like her kind of quest for answers quite a lot, and she's, you end up becoming very friendly with these people, because how could you not? Like, they've told you unbelievably, like, they've shared everything with you,
Yep.
And she's I'm friends with her on Facebook, and so her son's been missing 30 years now. Like, every day, her update is, can someone just tell me the truth? Like, every day there's like a different picture of her son. That's her profile picture. Like, there's not a day that passes without it. It's like, when I've spoken to her, she is like almost like desperate to die, but she can't do because she doesn't know what happened to her son or where he is. And like, it's one of those things where, the combination of curiosity, empathy, what am I as a journalist, or what, am I a storyteller? All of these things just mesh, because you're like, I want to do some good, but I don't want to exhaust these people. Like, I don't want to be, I don't want to make anything more difficult for them. It's, it's all things I'm sure that you've asked yourselves, during the process of what you're doing, but it's just very complicated.
It is, yeah, and it's actually very therapeutic for us to talk to you about this.
Yeah.
We got to have you back on because we flew through this interview, and it's really compelling, and you write about a lot of really fascinating cases that we want to know more about, and your writing is amazing. Like the story about the Erickson sisters, I really want to get into on another episode.
The pusher.
The pusher
Good
too.
God.
But I mean, I feel like the first paragraph that you have in a lot of these articles they really hit you, or even the first sentence. Like this Erickson sisters article, it's called "The Twins Who Ran into Traffic Before Stabbing a Man to Death." The first paragraph is, "They're going to steal your organs," screams Sabina Erickson before running towards oncoming traffic on the M6 motorway, having already been hit head-on by a Volkswagen driving at speed.
Yeah, someone quite recently got in touch with me and told me that they think they know where one of those sisters are, where she is.
Really?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which I would like. I mean, I'd give anything to sit down and just ask what was going on there.